My husband replaced me with a younger woman on Christmas Eve. I sat on a bench shivering in the snow. When I saw a barefoot man turning blue, I took off my winter boots and gave them to him. 2 hours later, 17 black SUVs surrounded me. The man stepped out and simply said, "I'm glad to have you here." I have to ask, have you ever sacrificed your own comfort for someone else, only to have it change your life? Tell me your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. I'd love to know who's part of our community. 2 hours earlier, the air in our penthouse was so cold it could have cracked the marble floors. It smelled of ozone, imported lilies, and Michael's desperate ambition. He paced in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, checking his reflection more often than the time. Tonight was the New Year's Eve gala, the night he was supposed to land the contract that would define his career. "Jennifer, look at you," he said, gesturing at me with a half-empty glass of scotch. "You're just beige. The new firm is about the future. Sharp lines. Bold choices. You don't fit the aesthetic." I stood by the kitchen island, wearing the dress he had bought me 3 years ago. Back then, he said it made me look distinguished. Now, apparently, distinguished was code for expired. "What are you saying, Michael?" I asked, though the answer was already standing in the doorway. Ellie walked in. She was 26, wearing a silver dress that looked like liquid mercury. She held a bottle of champagne by the neck, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. She looked at me like I was furniture left on the curb for pickup. "We're rebranding, Jen," Michael said, adjusting his tie. "New year, new energy. I need someone beside me who looks like the future. You need to be gone before the guests arrive. Leave your keys on the counter." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A younger version of me might have begged. But in that moment, a heavy quiet settled over my chest. For 20 years, I convinced myself my silence was strength. It was the invisible chain of the survivor. I had built a house of cards in my mind, believing that if I made myself small enough, if I fixed every mistake without asking for credit, the structure wouldn't collapse. I thought my compliance was the glue holding our life together. But standing there, watching Ellie pour champagne, I realized the truth. My silence hadn't been keeping me safe. It had been burying me alive. I walked past them into the bedroom. I didn't pack a suitcase. I took a single tote bag with my laptop, chargers, and my mother's old scarf. I stripped the identity of Michael's wife off my shoulders and left it on the bedspread. As I walked back to the front door, Michael was bent over the main table, reviewing the blueprints for the harbor project. He was muttering about zoning laws. I paused. I looked down at the wide sheets of paper. My eyes locked onto a glaring error. He had designed a glass atrium over the West Pier. I knew, because I had spent 3 weeks researching the archives, that the West Pier was a protected historical landmark. The city council would reject the permit on site. My instinct, honed by 2 decades of habit, was to pick up a red pen. To fix it. To save him. My hand actually twitched at my side. Then, I looked at Ellie whispering in his ear. I tightened my grip on my tote bag. I let the error sit there, a ticking time bomb in blue ink. I wasn't the safety net anymore. "Goodbye, Michael," I said. He didn't look up. "Leave the key card, Jen. Don't make a scene." I placed the plastic card on the cold table. The click echoed like a gunshot. I walked out, taking the elevator down 40 floors into the biting wind of the real world. The wind off the harbor wasn't just cold, it was personal. It cut through my thin blouse, hunting for the warmth stored in my bones. I sat on the metal bench of the bus stop, my knees pressed together. To my left, a man was muttering to himself. He looked like driftwood, a fixture of the city people walked past without seeing. He was older, wearing a windbreaker so thin it might as well have been paper. He was shivering violently. But he wasn't focused on the cold. He was wrestling with a notebook, cursing under his breath. "The tonnage, it doesn't match the pier depth," he rasped. 1892, no, 94. I stared at him. The words pulled me out of my misery. Pier depth. I knew those numbers. I had spent 6 months living in the city archives for Michael's project. It was 1896, I said. My voice was brittle. The trade route didn't shift south until the Great Dredge of 1896. Before that, the West Pier could only handle shallow draft schooners. The man stopped flipping pages. He looked up. His eyes were startlingly sharp. The Great Dredge, he repeated. That's why the structural pilings are set 20 feet deeper on the north side. Exactly, I said, the librarian in me taking over. If you build heavy infrastructure on the south side without reinforcing the silt bed, the foundation cracks within 5 years. It's in the Municipal Geology Survey from 1902. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. It wasn't the look of a madman. It was the look of a man who had just found the missing piece of a puzzle. Of course, he whispered. The drainage runoff. He scribbled frantically, his hand shaking so hard the pen barely stayed on the paper. That's when I really saw him. His lips were turning a dangerous shade of blue. His hands were raw red knuckles. He was entering the early stages of hypothermia right in front of me. I looked down at my coat. It was a heavy down parka, charcoal gray. It was the most expensive thing I owned, my only shield against the wind. Without it, I would be nothing but a middle-aged woman in a cocktail dress sitting at a bus stop on New Year's Eve. But I looked at his hands. I thought about Michael, safe and warm in the penthouse, indifferent to the cold reality outside. I realized then that warmth wasn't something you hoarded. It was something you created. I stood up. The wind hit me instantly, stealing the heat from my skin. Stand up, I said. He looked confused. What? I took the coat off. The cold was a physical shock, a slam against my chest. I didn't hesitate. I stepped forward and draped the heavy coat over his shoulders. I zipped it to his chin. You're going to freeze, he stammered, looking at me like I had performed a magic trick. I'm tough, I said, wrapping my arms around myself, teeth chattering. Keep the heat in. He touched the fabric of the coat. He looked at me, really looked at me, and the sharpness in his eyes softened into something profound. You know the history of the harbor, he said softly. And you give away your only coat. Who are you? Just someone who knows what it's like to be cold, I whispered. He didn't say thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an object. It wasn't money. It was a compass. Old brass, tarnished by salt, the glass face scratched but unbroken. Hold this, he said, pressing it into my freezing palm. True north isn't a place on a map. It's character. And I think I just found mine. I looked down at the compass. The needle was pointing straight at him. Before I could ask what he meant, the hum of engines drowned out the wind. Lights flooded the bus stop. It wasn't a bus. It was a fleet. 17 black SUVs rolled into formation, boxing us in. Men in earpieces stepped out. I took a step back, terrified. The old man stood up. He didn't look like a shivering fisherman anymore. He straightened his spine, the heavy coat hanging off his shoulders like a royal cape. Right on time, he said. Mr. Sterling, one of the men said, stepping forward. Your core temperature dropped 2 degrees. The board is panicking. Let them panic, the old man said. His voice had changed. The rasp was gone, replaced by absolute command. Panic breeds efficiency. He unzipped my parka and handed it back. Underneath the thin windbreaker, I saw the glint of a silk lining. I'm Richard Sterling, he said, extending a steady hand. I froze. Richard Sterling. The tech mogul. The man Michael had spent 6 months and $50,000 trying to impress. Michael had bought a new wardrobe just to match Sterling's aesthetic. And here he was, standing at a bus stop. You're him, I managed. Michael has been trying to call you for weeks. I know, Richard said. I've seen his emails. Full of buzzwords and ego. He wants to build a glass monument to himself on my harbor. He gestured to the frozen water. I didn't come down here to see architectural renderings, Jennifer. I came to see the truth. I wanted to feel the wind. You can't design a future for a city if you don't understand its past. I needed to know if there was anyone left who actually gave a damn about the foundation. He looked at the notebook where I had corrected his data. My team missed the 1896 dredge, he said. They would have cost me $100 million in structural repairs. He stepped closer. You didn't just give me data. You gave me your coat. In my world, people don't give. They transact. They extract. He held up the compass. This belonged to my grandfather. He told me that true direction comes from character. For 10 years, I've been looking for a chief historical consultant. Someone who protects the history, not just bulldozes it. He pressed the compass into my hand again. The job is yours, Jennifer. $250,000 a year. Full benefits. And you answer only to me. I stared at him. $250,000. That was 5 times what I had made as a librarian. It was freedom. It was a door opening in a wall I had been banging my head against for 20 years. I don't have a brand, I stammered. Good, Richard said. I don't want a brand. I want a partner. The door of the lead SUV opened. Golden light spilled out. We have work to do, Richard said. The zoning meeting is in 3 weeks. And I suspect you have corrections to make to those blueprints. I looked back at the empty bench. I looked at the dark street that led back to Michael, back to being invisible. I didn't say goodbye to that life. I just turned my back on it. I stepped into the SUV. The door closed with a solid thud, shutting out the cold and the silence of the last 20 years. To the office, Richard said. We need to rewrite the future. 3 weeks. That's how long it took to realize that competence is a form of warmth. I wasn't working in a drafty apartment anymore. I was working in a mobile command center Richard had set up on the north side of the harbor. My job title was Chief Historical Consultant, but really, I was the gatekeeper. I sat at a mahogany desk, a red pen in hand, slashing through the proposals Michael's firm sent over. They were tragic. He had ignored the 1896 dredge line again. He was trying to put a load-bearing wall on a silk bed that couldn't support a lemonade stand. He's desperate, Richard said, walking past with coffee. He sent 5 emails this morning using words like quantum aesthetics. I think he's having a breakdown. He's not having a breakdown, I said, cold precision in my voice. He's running out of money. If he doesn't land this contract tonight, the firm goes under. It was just data. Then, my phone buzzed. A personal email from Michael. Subject, trash collection. Jennifer, since you're playing games, I'm clearing out your junk. That upright Steinway your mother left you. It doesn't fit the new decor. It's on the curb. It's going to rain in 2 hours. Come get it, or the garbage truck takes it. My hand froze. That piano wasn't junk. It was a 1920 Steinway. It was the only thing my mother left me. It was the heartbeat of my childhood. He knew that. He wasn't cleaning house, he was taking a hostage. I stood up, panic clawing at my throat. I needed a truck. I needed to run. Jennifer? Richard asked. I handed him the tablet. Richard read it. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. The way a grandmaster looks when an amateur uses a pawn to threaten a queen. He thinks because he's in the penthouse, he controls the building, Richard said softly. I have to go, I said. If it rains, the soundboard will warp. Sit down, Jennifer. The command was gentle but absolute. Richard walked to his safe and pulled out a blue folder. I didn't just hire you because you knew history, he said. I hired you because I knew who you were married to. And I knew that a man who builds glass houses shouldn't throw stones. He placed the folder on my desk. It was a debt acquisition form. Michael's firm has been leveraged to the hilt. He borrowed against the building to pay for his lifestyle. To pay for Ellie's car. To pay for the branding. The bank was going to foreclose next month. He tapped the paper. I bought the debt this morning, Jennifer. I own the mortgage on the commercial property. I own the lien on the penthouse. I own the chair he's sitting in. I stared at the numbers. 7 figures of debt, all transferred to Sterling Holdings. You bought his debt. I whispered. I bought his leverage, Richard corrected. He is currently trespassing on my property. And he is threatening to damage the personal property of my chief consultant. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the back. Proxy statement. This designates you as my proxy, Richard said. It gives you full voting power for the majority shareholder. Tonight, at the gala, that is you. He slid the paper toward me. You don't need to rent a truck. You walk in there as the owner. And you tell him that if he touches a single key on that Steinway, you will liquidate his entire life. I looked at the document. The panic in my chest evaporated. It was replaced by something colder. Stronger. I wasn't the wife scrambling to save her heirlooms anymore. I was the landlord coming to collect. The gala is in 4 hours, I said. Then we better get you a suit, Richard said. You have a board meeting to attend. The grand ballroom of the Maritime Hotel was a cage made of crystal and light. Michael had spent the last of the company's budget renting it. I walked in through the double doors, flanking Richard Sterling. I wasn't wearing beige. I was wearing a midnight blue power suit, tailored to within an inch of its life. My hair was pulled back. I wasn't hiding. I was arriving. On stage, Michael held a microphone, basking in the spotlight. Ellie stood behind him, draped in something sheer, looking like a trophy. Architecture is about shedding the dead weight of the past, Michael announced. We need to rise above the old foundations. He raised his glass. To the future. The room applauded politely. It was a room full of sharks, investors, zoning board directors. They were there to see if Michael could deliver. Then, Richard stepped into the light. The applause died instantly. A hush swept over the room. Richard Sterling didn't go to galas. His presence was a royal decree. Michael's eyes snapped to us. He saw Richard and lit up with greedy relief. Then, he saw me. His smile faltered. He blinked. He let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. Jennifer, he scoffed. Did you crash the party? Security. He waved a hand, dismissing me. Ellie giggled. I tried to tell her, Richard, Michael said, walking toward us, ignoring me completely. My ex-wife has a hard time letting go. It's sad. She doesn't understand that some people aren't built for this level. He reached for Richard's hand. Richard didn't move. Mr. Sterling, Michael said, freezing. I assume you're here to sign the contract. I'm here to observe the vote, Richard said. The vote? Michael frowned. I own the firm. I am the vote. Not anymore. Richard stepped aside, clearing the space between Michael and me. I'd like to introduce you to the representative of Sterling Holdings. She holds the proxy for the majority debt of your firm. She casts the deciding vote. Michael looked at me. He looked at the suit. He looked at the way I was standing, not shrinking, not apologizing. Her, he whispered. You gave the proxy to the librarian. I gave the proxy to the architect, Richard corrected. I stepped forward. I placed the blue folder on a cocktail table and opened it. The glass atrium over the West Pier, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried like a gavel strike. It violates the Historical Preservation Act. The city council would revoke your license for even proposing it. Michael's face went pale. That's a technicality. No, it isn't, I continued. Because you cited the columns on the south silt bed. The 1896 dredge line makes that soil unstable. If you build there, the atrium collapses into the harbor within 5 years. It's negligent homicide. I looked up at him. I tried to tell you that on New Year's Eve, I said. But you were too busy looking at your reflection to look at the blueprints. Michael stammered. He looked around the room for an ally, but the investors were backing away. They smelled blood. In that moment, I understood why he was crumbling so fast. For 20 years, Michael had confused having with being. He thought having the penthouse made him powerful. He thought having the contract made him a visionary. But those were just costumes. It is the delusion of power of the empty wallet. He had spent his life renting his status. He rented his genius from my research. He rented his confidence from the admiration of people he paid to clap. Now, the rent was due. And when you strip away the borrowed assets, you find out what a man actually owns. Michael owned nothing. His wallet, his character, his integrity, was empty. He was just a man in a rented tuxedo standing on sand. This is ridiculous, Michael spat. I built this firm. You were nothing but the help. And now, I said, the help is firing the management. I took the vintage compass out of my pocket and set it on top of the blueprints. The contract is denied. Sterling Holdings is pulling the funding. Ellie gasped. She dropped Michael's arm like it was burning hot. She looked at him, then at the door, calculating her exit. You can't, Michael pleaded. I have overhead. I have the lease on the penthouse. If this deal falls through, I lose everything. About the penthouse, I said, pulling one final document. As the new owner of the building's debt, I audited the tenant logs. You used company funds to pay for personal renovations. That's a breach of lease. I handed him the eviction notice. You have 2 hours to vacate. I suggest you take the stairs. I didn't wait for his answer. I turned around and walked back to Richard. Ready to go? He asked. Yes, I said. I have a piano to move. I watched him from the window of the mobile command center. It was snowing again. Down on the curb, Michael stood exactly where I had stood 3 weeks ago. He was wearing his tuxedo, shivering, a single suitcase by his feet. He looked small. He looked like a man waiting for an audience that had already gone home. A yellow taxi pulled up. It wasn't for him. Ellie stepped out of the shadows, wearing a stolen trench coat. She didn't look back at him. She got in the cab and slammed the door. The taillights faded, leaving him alone. I thought I would feel a surge of victory. I thought I would want to go down there and tell him that karma is a mirror. But I didn't feel any of that. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something clean and quiet. I didn't need him to suffer. I just needed him gone. I turned away from the window. Jennifer? Richard called. I walked over. Spread out on the mahogany surface weren't blueprints for a glass tower. They were plans for the Sterling Community Center. A place with foundations deep enough to hold the history I loved. The zoning board just emailed, Richard said. They love the proposal. Specifically the preservation of the West Pier. They said it shows integrity. He smiled. Good work, partner. I sat down. I picked up the red pen, not to correct a mistake, but to sign my name. Next to the pen sat the vintage compass. The needle was steady, pointing true north. I touched the metal. For the first time in 20 years, I knew exactly where I was. I want to say something to you. To the woman reading this, sitting at a dinner table where no one asks her opinion. To the professional staying late to do the work while someone else takes credit. You think your silence is saving you. You think if you make yourself small enough, the storm will pass. You think being the invisible one is a strategy for survival. It isn't. It is a slow burial. They will not wake up one day and realize your worth. They will not suddenly decide to pay the rent on your soul. You have to evict them. Don't wait for a billionaire to find you at a bus stop. You are the architect. You are the builder. And you are the only one who can walk out that door and into the cold to find your own warmth. The world needs your voice, not your shadow. Be your own rescue. If this story reminded you that you are the architect of your own worth, share this video. Let's remind every woman that her silence isn't saving her, it's time to speak. Follow for more stories of truth and triumph.